Governor Newsom's former chief of staff facing charges in a federal investigation. One of the most powerful people in California's political system, accused of fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. Who is wrapped up in this 3-year FBI investigation? The money investigators say was taken from a dormant campaign account for the former Health and Human Services Secretary.
Ms. Williamson, do you have anything to say to Javier Becerra right now?
No.
The questions we are asking and the potential impact to powerful people.
Should other California officials and people involved in the government be concerned now with this investigation underway?
Thank you for joining us for this week's California Politics 360. I'm Ashley Zavala. Governor Gavin Newsom's former chief of staff was indicted this week. Dana Williamson is facing 23 charges, including fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. She pleaded not guilty to all of those charges. They are part of a 3 separate claim against Williamson, who is considered a powerhouse in California politics. 1, investigators claim Williamson's lobbying firm should not have received loans from the Paycheck Protection Program, and she falsified documents when they began looking into her business. 2, Williamson is accused of underreporting her business income on her tax returns for 3 years. And finally, investigators claim Williamson helped orchestrate a system to funnel about $225,000 from one of Javier Becerra's dormant political accounts to his chief of staff while he was serving in President Biden's administration. After her initial court appearance, Williamson was released on bail due to health reasons. I tried to speak with Williamson as she left court Wednesday.
Should other California officials and people involved in the government be concerned now with this investigation underway?
Do you have any comment, Ms. Williamson?
No, you guys can contact my attorney.
Do you have anything to say at all?
Ms. Williamson, do you have anything to say to Javier Becerra right now?
No.
He called this a gut punch.
The bulk of Williamson's federal charges stem from an alleged scheme, which Williamson is accused of organizing to pay Javier Becerra's former chief of staff, Sean McCluskey, money from one of Becerra's inactive campaign accounts. Investigators say McCluskey, who was working for Becerra in Washington, D.C. when he was Health and Human Services Secretary, took a pay cut with that job and wanted to make more money. So to allegedly do that, the indictment says Williamson got help from a major Sacramento lobbyist and consultant named Greg Campbell to funnel the funds. Court documents show both Campbell and McCluskey will accept plea deals. Joining us now to help break this down and make sense of this is Chris McCaley, who is not only an adjunct McGeorge School of Law professor, but also a longtime lobbyist here in California. So Chris, just in both of those capacities, what was your reaction when you saw this happen?
Well, I think like the rest of the Sacramento community, it was a surprise to everybody. Folks were caught off guard. And it involves people that we both know and have worked with in the past.
In the big picture of political corruption, crimes, the spectrum, I mean, where does Dana Williamson's alleged crimes here rank?
Well, first of all, I'm going to differ a little bit in that I don't think this was political corruption. I think usually we use that terminology when it involves either an elected official or perhaps a staff member senior in government. But these alleged allegations are believed to have occurred outside of those official capacities. So I don't think it was political corruption from my viewpoint.
But in terms of how serious these are, what would you say?
No doubt they're serious allegations. Not only serious allegations, but if convicted, obviously serious consequences for engaging in the alleged conduct.
When it comes to the alleged conspiracy with Becerra's campaign accounts, why do you think there are so many charges against Williamson, but not her alleged co-conspirators, Sean McCluskey and Greg Campbell?
Well, I think primarily because they were allegedly involved in one aspect. Remember, that 23-count indictment involves not just the alleged improper payments, but also the claiming the PPP loan from the federal government, the alleged deceptive practices involving her income tax return, And then the fourth area is the allegation that she lied to federal agents. And certainly there are 4 different set of potential accusations that she's facing that weren't applicable to the other 2 gentlemen.
Williamson's attorney, McGregor Scott, is claiming investigators last year asked for her help with an investigation into Governor Gavin Newsom. But Scott says she declined because she said she didn't have any information and had not seen any misconduct from the governor. That is a big accusation and a big development in all of this as we try to understand what's happening here. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I have no reason to question either her statement nor that of McGregor Scott, the former United States Attorney for the Eastern District right here. I think also it raises the specter of some people viewing it, whether or not this was politically motivated. I think we should stay clear of making accusations on either side, because ultimately that could undermine the criminal justice process here. Remember, these people are accused of various serious criminal offenses, and we want to ensure that they have a fair and unbiased jury of their peers, if that's what they have to face. And anything that would do things to undermine that process, I think, are problematic. But when it is raised like that, it might appear to some folks that these are politically motivated charges, especially in light of what is happening at the federal level.
All right. Chris McHaley, we really appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
We should note we've reached out to Williamson's attorney, McGregor Scott, and Javier Becerra to come on the program. Both declined. We will continue to extend that invitation for them to come on and tell their side of the story here. Next on California Politics 360, 2 political strategists assess the impact this indictment has on the political future of Governor Gavin Newsom and Javier Becerra. Continuing our coverage of the indictment of Governor Gavin Newsom's former chief of staff, Dana Williamson has pleaded not guilty to 23 charges against her. I'm joined now by 2 political consultants, Democratic Party consultant Stephen Maviglio and Republican consultant Tim Rosales. Thank you both for making time for us today.
Thank you.
So, Stephen, you have actually known Dana for a very long time, calling her a good friend. She pled not guilty to those charges, but 2 others are expected to take these plea deals. The rules allegedly broken here. Some critics have said that this is essentially sloppy political work, that they should have known better. Do you agree?
You know, I think to some degree, yes. And as you said, I've known Dana for 3 decades, and I also know Greg Campbell, who you mentioned earlier in the broadcast. These people that know the rules, you know, they've seen scandals in their times in Sacramento. We've had quite a few over the years. And so, yeah, they understand what's going on here. That's why it's unbelievable to me. That's why I think, as mentioned earlier, there might be political motivations here.
Tim, Dana was at the center of very powerful political alliances, essentially. For those on the outside, how are people processing this?
Well, for those on the outside, I think it's, you know, probably the biggest political news kind of from a legal standpoint since maybe Shrimp Scam, which if you look at our history books, you know, back to the 90s, including, you know, 12 elected officials who were, you know, convicted of corruption in terms of, you know, the political news. I think that everybody kind of, whether you're Republican or Democrat, are looking at this who operate and work in Sacramento and kind of asking a lot of the questions that I think that you just asked Steve, which is why, how did this happen? These are, you know, relatively very experienced people, but relatively, you know, kind of inexperienced, you know, things that they did. So what was the cause? And so those are the questions I think everybody has at this point.
Stephen, from the Democratic perspective, with Javier Becerra's name being mentioned in this case, his chief of staff apparently agreeing to plead guilty to taking funds from his campaign, how do you see this impacting Javier Becerra's own campaign as he's running for California governor right now?
Yeah, I think it's problematic for him. I mean, he's seen as an altar boy to a lot of people because he's always had that good government kind of image. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a stain on his image because it was his account and his employee, and it's hard to run away from that.
Tim, is this a problem for Javier Becerra, even from a Republican perspective, too?
Well, I think it's certainly a problem for him in an already crowded, you know, political political and democratic field. The question is how do you recover? What are his next steps? This is an opportunity to tell his story, and certainly he's going to have to at some point because he's so prominently featured in this. The question is just when is he going to do that, and being able to articulate that in a way that can help him potentially recover, or whether or not it's kind of a nail in the coffin for his gubernatorial hopes.
Could it be a nail in the coffin for his gubernatorial hopes?
Oh, I think certainly, especially with a crowded field like this, and he's already not performing at the top of that list. So therefore, Democratic voters and voters in general aren't necessarily looking at him as one of the top tier candidates, and this clearly is something that will damage that.
Stephen, I see you nodding a bit. Is this a campaign ender?
Well, I think he's already had a couple nails in the coffin, given he's had a very slow start. It doesn't help, that's for sure.
How could this impact Governor Gavin Newsom and his administration and his potential future campaigns?
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger question. I mean, most of the headlines weren't Dana Williamson, they were Governor Newsom's top aide. And, he's been on the rise for the last few weeks and months, and I think this definitely slow his momentum. I think their natural pushback, and we've seen it, and I think there might be some truth to it, is that this is the weaponization of the DOJ and FBI. This was a case that was started by the Biden administration. They must have had a reason to look into the Newsom administration, but then it was dormant, and then suddenly a new attorney for Northern California was appointed by Trump, and suddenly it was revived, complete with a whole show at Dana's house, was people dressed up in shields, carrying guns, arresting and putting handcuffs on her son. That was a show.
Did she say that to you,
Yes.
that happened?
Yes.
Tim, what do you make of that?
Well, I think, certainly we've got some serious allegations, but in terms of kind of political motivation, I would see this, as a bank shot, at best, if you're talking about, the Trump administration or the Department of Justice, currently. If you want to go after Governor Newsom, there are certainly, I think, better and more direct ways to do that from a Trump administration perspective. And I think that, what Steve mentioned about it starting with the Biden administration, says a little bit about the fact that they feel like they have something there and they're seeing it through. The question, I think there's a lot of questions at this point that we just don't know.
And could you see Republicans, though, using this against Governor Gavin Newsom, circling back to the first question I asked?
I actually think we will see other Democrats in the presidential primary campaign using this against Governor Newsom. I don't think the Republicans are necessarily going to need to use this as ammunition against Governor Newsom.
You both mentioned previous scandals in California politics. Given what we know this week, do you see political consultants, lobbying firms, other operatives, this changing any of the way that things might operate in the state?
Yeah, I think there's certainly going to be fallout. I know, some clients of both of them have already said, we're not going to do business with you anymore because of this. I think other people are very nervous and looking at their Form 700s and other official forms to make sure every T is crossed and I is dotted. So that kind of thing will last for quite some time, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of, California has some of the most stringent public disclosure rules in the country, and I think that, that is a protection, but it's also something that people who work in the political business, need to be aware of and just make sure that their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed.
How do you think voters are processing all of this as they try to make sense of it all?
The question is, how much really does this play into what voters are experiencing on a day-to-day basis? And I don't know that it really necessarily impacts what they may or may not do in June or November of 2026 at this point, and to what degree it is they're digesting the minutia that, of course, we are here, but to average everyday voters on the street, they still have bigger issues that are impacting them at their own homes and in their communities. I think that this is just kind of, they see this happening, and but it's not a huge top of issue point.
We have 15 seconds left, but just your final thoughts.
Somebody told me once, voters expect political corruption. It's like a dog drinking water out of a toilet bowl. It's going to happen sooner or later.
All right, Stephen Maviglio, Tim Rosales, we appreciate you both so much for your insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, next on California Politics 360, Governor Newsom spent the week in Brazil signing climate agreements. The impact to California. Continuing our coverage of the indictment of Governor Gavin Newsom's former chief of staff, Dana Williamson, has pleaded not guilty to 23 federal charges against her. Joining me now is San Francisco Chronicle political reporter Sophia Bolag. Sophia, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, I just want to start, we talked about this in the last panel, but what are you hearing when it comes to the possible impacts of not just Governor Gavin Newsom, but also potential gubernatorial candidate Xavier Becerra?
Yeah, I would say there isn't like a clear consensus at this point about exactly how much this impacts Becerra's gubernatorial campaign, but there is sort of widespread agreement that it's not great for him. I think that it does, even though he's not implicated, the indictment really does go out of its way to really make it clear that he was the victim here, was not one of the co-conspirators, at least according to the federal government in their indictment. But it does sort of call into question his judgment. He did approve these very high payments of $10,000 a month to a political consultant to basically manage dormant accounts. And so I think there are really questions there about, his judgment. He has said that he really trusted his former chief of staff, who was, the one who, then current chief of staff, who was the one who told him that these were appropriate amounts to be paying. So that's really his defense there, but I do think it raises questions.
And the headlines for Governor Gavin Newsom, though, I mean, how does that impact him?
Definitely not great. I think, as was mentioned in the previous segment, he's in all the headlines. And, even though he is also not implicated in the indictment, there's really no evidence that he did anything wrong here. I think, as you've pointed out, the specter of a possible investigation of by the federal government into Newsom, we don't know if there really was one. That's what Dana Williamson's lawyer says she was told. But we don't know at this point whether that's really what was happening or what it was about. And Newsom's office has said that they're not aware of any federal investigations initiated under either the Biden administration or the Trump administration, and that there's no basis for any. But we just don't know what that means. And so I think it really casts a real specter over the governor here.
Yeah, but those are important notes. I mean, the governor watched this happen from Brazil this week. And just given, the global stage that he was on when this happened, he was also at the same time trying to make some news himself by signing agreements with other nations. I mean, how substantive do you see those agreements being?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the agreement. Newsom and his advisors would tell you they are substantive and they are meaningful. But I think it's also really a messaging play for him. And this is not the first time he's done this. He went to China a couple of years ago and also signed climate agreements there. He has really, as President Trump has really taken a step back and pulled the United States out of a lot of global climate agreements and really reversed a lot of policies that were implemented under the Obama and Biden administrations. Newsom has really tried to step forward on the international stage and present himself as what he would say is a reliable partner, a more consistent partner, himself and California. Because even as at the federal level, as administrations have shifted from Democrat to Republican, the policies have changed. In California, it's much more consistent. There's a much more consistent commitment from the state government here to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and, really combating climate change. And so that's really what Governor Newsom has been talking about in Brazil, really trying to sort of present himself as a foil to Donald Trump. Right. And, present California as, even if the United States is backing off of things, California is still pushing ahead.
All right. Sophia Bolag with the San Francisco Chronicle. Thank you so much for your time.
Great to be here.
Thank you. All right. Well, next, a look back at the history of one of the oldest towns in California. This week, we're taking a look back at one of California's largest and oldest cities. El Pueblo de San Jose de Guadalupe was officially founded on November 29, 1777. Visit San Jose says it was the first town in the Spanish colony Nueva California. These are photos from the California State Library showing the city in the 1800s. You can visit the last remaining structure. Peralta Adobe was built in 1797. There are tours inside every single weekend. Well, thank you for joining us for this week's California Politics 360. We'll see you right back here next Sunday.